I never thought I'd be the kind of person who would come online to pour my heart out to strangers. But here I am. I've been carrying so much weight on my chest that I feel like if I don't let it out, I'll suffocate. This is a throwaway account because I don't want anyone in my real life connecting the dots. Only one close friend and my counselor know the whole truth, and even then I've kept parts of it locked away. I think I'm still trying to make sense of how my life has unraveled. I know in my bones that my marriage is over, but writing the words and saying them out loud feels like ripping apart the last illusion I've been holding on to. I met my husband, H, over a decade ago. We were both in the military back then, and maybe that's why I was drawn to him. There was a toughness about him, a confidence, and yet also a vulnerability that he only let slip in private moments. We bonded over long shifts, dark humor, and the shared understanding of what it felt like to serve, to be away from family, to deal with the invisible scars that uniform life leaves behind. For a while, he was my safe place. We laughed, we dreamed, and when things got hard, I told myself that we were both fighters, and fighters always push through. Fast forward 10 years, and here I am, sitting in a house that feels more like a cage than a home. We have a child together, my whole world, and that's what kept me pushing through so many rough patches. I told myself I was staying for my son, that he deserved a whole family, that I could handle the storms if it meant he wouldn't have to grow up in a broken home. I forgave H for things that, in hindsight, I probably shouldn't have. I swallowed my own pain more times than I can count because I thought that was what love looked like. Sacrifice, compromise, resilience. But what do you do when you finally realize that the person you've been sacrificing for is no longer the person you thought they were? What do you do when you realize they've crossed a line that you can never, ever uncross? This year was supposed to be different. We'd been through so much, and I thought we were finally stepping into a new chapter. We bought a house, something we'd dreamed about for years, and H was finally awarded 100% disability through the VA. If you've ever been part of the veteran community, you know what a big deal that is. It's financial security, stability, the acknowledgement of years of sacrifice and pain. I was so proud of him, and honestly proud of myself for being the one who kept nudging him to apply, to push, to believe he deserved it. For years I had been encouraging him to seek the rating he deserved, and when it finally happened, it felt like a victory for both of us. And then, not long after, I found out that I had been awarded 100% as well. It was like the universe was finally giving me a break. I'd been fighting my own battles with the VA, and when that letter came in, I cried tears of joy. I thought this was our chance to breathe, to celebrate, to finally enjoy life without the constant stress of money and paperwork and proving ourselves over and over. I wanted to go out, to mark the moment, to let myself feel like we'd climbed a mountain together. So that Friday, we went to this local theater complex that had a restaurant and an arcade attached. The kind of place that feels fun and lighthearted, with families running around, kids laughing, neon lights buzzing in the background. My son and I spent hours in the arcade, our laughter echoing between the flashing machines and ticket dispensers. I let myself feel like a kid again, playing games, watching my son's eyes light up when he won prizes. Meanwhile, H parked himself at the bar. He drank while we played. At first, I didn't think much of it. He'd always enjoyed drinking, and I had learned to look the other way, even though it bothered me more than I admitted. But the longer we stayed, the more I noticed how he seemed less engaged, more detached, as if the celebration wasn't really about us as a family, but about him escaping into his own world. When the arcade was winding down, I suggested to my son that we catch a movie. His face lit up instantly, and he was so excited. But H shut it down. He said the bar was closing, that it was late, that we should go home. Something in me rebelled. I had promised my son a fun night, and I wasn't about to take that away from him just because H wanted to drink more or because he was getting impatient. I reminded H that he'd told us earlier to enjoy ourselves, to have fun, and so I told him we were going to see the movie. He didn't come with us. Instead, he left and went to another bar. I tried not to let it ruin the moment. I wanted to focus on my son, on the way his small hand fit into mine as we bought our tickets, on the joy on his face when the previews started. For those 2 hours, I let myself forget the tension. I let myself just be a mom enjoying a movie with her kid. But reality came crashing back when the credits rolled, and I texted H. His reply made my heart drop. He'd been pulled over. My brain immediately went to the worst-case scenario. DUI. Arrest. Our lives upended in one stupid night. My stomach twisted, and I felt my chest tighten. I looked at my son, who was happily chattering about the movie, and all I could think was, how am I going to get us home? Was I going to have to walk miles in the dark with my child? Was I about to get a call from the police asking me to pick up my husband from jail? The panic coursed through me, hot and sharp. I couldn't focus on anything except the fear of what was about to happen. When H finally pulled up, I felt this strange mix of relief and fury. He brushed it off, saying it was just a speeding ticket. He acted like I was overreacting, like I was being dramatic. He wouldn't let me drive the car home, even though I didn't trust him behind the wheel. I sat in that passenger seat, every muscle tense, holding my son's hand in the back seat and silently praying we'd make it home safe. Once we were home, I tucked my son into bed, tried to reassure him, tried to act like everything was fine even though I was shaking inside. Then H and I ended up in the bathroom, the only place where we could argue without waking our son. And argue we did. I tried to explain why I was upset, how scared I'd been, how irresponsible it was for him to put himself, and us, in that position. But he gaslighted me at every turn. He twisted my words, made me feel like I was crazy for worrying, acted like it was no big deal. It was just a speeding ticket, he kept saying, as if that erased the fear, as if that erased the fact that he'd abandoned us for alcohol in the first place. I tried to disengage. I knew where this was going, and I didn't want to fight. I told him I couldn't talk to him while he was like this, that we needed to let it go for the night. But he wouldn't stop. He kept pushing, his voice getting louder, his body language more aggressive. And then it happened. He stepped into my space, close enough that I could feel the heat of his anger radiating off him. Before I could react, his hands were on me. He shoved me backward, hard, until my back slammed into the shelves inside our closet. I froze. For a second, I couldn't breathe. My mind went blank, my body went rigid. This wasn't just words anymore. This wasn't just an argument. This was him crossing a line I had always prayed he'd never cross. I heard myself say, in a voice that didn't even sound like mine, "Get your hands off me. Don't touch me." My whole body trembled as I stared at him, waiting to see what he would do next. He didn't hit me again, but the damage was already done. The man I had married, the man I had defended, the man I had given chance after chance, had put his hands on me in anger. And nothing would ever be the same again. The rest of the night blurred together in this surreal haze. He kept talking, kept swinging between anger and remorse, until he eventually mellowed out. I stayed quiet, numb, just trying to survive the night. When I finally crawled into bed, my body ached from holding in sobs. I barely slept. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my tears soaking the pillow, wondering how the hell my life had come to this. The next morning, I got up like a robot. My son had an appointment, and I had to keep it together for him. H texted me later, apologizing, saying he felt sick about what had happened. But I couldn't let myself believe his words. I texted back that he'd crossed a line, that I needed space, that I didn't know what I was going to do, but that things would never be the same. I took my son to his appointment, then dropped him back at the house before meeting a friend at the park. For the first time, I said the words out loud. He put his hands on me. My friend's face said it all. The shock, the anger, the sadness. And still I felt ashamed. Embarrassed. Like somehow I had failed, like somehow it was my fault. I didn't go home until late that afternoon, and when I did, I locked myself and my son in the bedroom. I couldn't bear to look at H, couldn't bear to hear his voice. I didn't speak to him for 2 whole days. In those silent hours, the truth settled in my bones. My marriage was over. The silence of those 2 days was heavy, almost suffocating. I went through the motions of life like a ghost, taking care of my son, doing what needed to be done, but inside I felt hollow. I kept replaying the moment over and over in my mind. The shove, the way my back hit the shelves, the cold realization that something inside me had shattered. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face twisted in anger, felt his hands pushing me, heard my own voice trembling as I told him not to touch me. I had never felt so small, so powerless, and yet, at the same time, something inside me had snapped into clarity. There was no coming back from this. The marriage I had fought so hard for, the family I had sacrificed for, was gone. When I finally spoke to him after those 2 days of silence, it wasn't the kind of conversation I imagined we'd have. He looked at me with this pathetic mixture of guilt and defensiveness, saying how sorry he was, how he couldn't believe what he'd done. He promised it would never happen again. I just sat there, numb, letting him talk. Words meant nothing to me anymore. I had heard so many promises before, so many apologies, so many excuses. I told him, plain and simple, that he had crossed a line we could never come back from. I told him I didn't want alcohol in the house anymore. And then I walked into the kitchen, opened every bottle we had, and poured them down the drain. The smell of whiskey and beer filled the air, and for a moment I felt like I was taking back a tiny piece of control, even if it was only symbolic. But after the last drop swirled down the sink, the reality set in again. I was trapped. I couldn't just pack up and leave. I was financially tied to this house. My family lived states away, and I didn't want to tell them what had happened because the shame burned too deep. I couldn't bear the thought of hearing their voices crack with disappointment or worry. I didn't want them to see me as weak, as someone who had stayed in a toxic marriage for far too long. My friends nearby were supportive, but none of them were people I could live with. I had nowhere to go. The house, once a symbol of our dreams, had become a prison. Every corner held echoes of that night, shadows that clung to me no matter where I turned. I'd sit in the living room and feel his presence even when he wasn't there. I'd lie in bed and feel the tension in my chest, waiting for the next argument, the next outburst. The walls felt like they were closing in, and yet I couldn't leave. My son ran through the halls, laughing, playing, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. And I kept telling myself that at least he was happy, at least he still had both parents under one roof. But I wondered how long I could keep pretending, how long I could shield him from the cracks that were splitting our family apart. I tried to focus on the future, on the things I could control. I was finishing my master's degree, and graduation was just months away. That degree felt like a lifeline, a way out, a reminder that I was still building something for myself. But some days, even that felt like a burden. I'd sit in front of my laptop, staring at assignments, and burst into tears. The weight of everything, school, motherhood, marriage, finances, pressed down on me until I could hardly breathe. I felt like I was crumbling under the pressure, and yet I kept going because what other choice did I have? The hardest part was the self-blame. I knew, logically, that it wasn't my fault. I knew that nothing I said or did justified what he did to me. But still, the guilt seeped in. Maybe if I hadn't argued with him in the bathroom. Maybe if I had let the speeding ticket go. Maybe if I hadn't pushed him to stop drinking, hadn't insisted we see the movie. My mind spun in circles, dissecting every detail of that night, looking for the mistake that I had made, the trigger that I had pulled. It was a vicious cycle, and I hated myself for it. Sometimes, I'd catch myself watching him when he didn't know I was looking. I'd see the way he carried himself, the way he tried to act normal, as if nothing had happened. And I'd wonder if he even remembered the look on my face when he shoved me. Did he remember the fear? Did he care? Or was this just another mistake to him, another thing he thought he could apologize away and bury under promises? The more I thought about it, the more disgusted I felt. Nights were the worst. Once my son was asleep, I'd lie in bed staring into the dark, listening to the creaks of the house, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the occasional footsteps of H moving around. My mind would spiral into what-ifs. What if he lost control again? What if he pushed harder next time? What if my son saw it? The thought of my son witnessing violence in our home made me sick to my stomach. I had promised myself long ago that I would never let him grow up in the same kind of chaos I had seen in other families. And yet here I was, raising him in a house filled with tension, with anger simmering just beneath the surface. I tried to put on a brave face for my son. I smiled when I had to, played games with him, tucked him in with stories and kisses. But kids are smart. They know when something is wrong. There were moments when he'd look at me with those big, innocent eyes and ask, "Mommy, are you okay?" And I'd plaster on a smile and say, "Of course, baby," even though inside I was breaking. I started thinking about the future in practical terms. Divorce, custody, finances. The words felt foreign on my tongue, but they played on repeat in my head. I didn't know how I would afford to untangle myself from H, how I would protect my son while also finishing school, how I would rebuild a life from the rubble of this marriage. The logistics overwhelmed me. But underneath the fear and uncertainty, there was a flicker of determination. I knew I couldn't stay in this forever. I knew I deserved better, and more importantly, my son deserved better. Still, the shame was a constant companion. I didn't tell my family because I couldn't bear the thought of admitting that my marriage had failed. I had always been the strong one, the fighter, the one who pushed through. Admitting that it was over felt like admitting defeat. It felt like admitting I had been blind, that I had wasted years of my life on someone who never deserved my loyalty. I couldn't stand the thought of hearing, "We told you so," or seeing pity in their eyes. So I carried it alone, burying the truth under half-smiles and vague answers. Sometimes I wondered if anyone really knew me anymore. To the outside world, I was the woman who had it all together. The veteran, the student, the mom, the wife. But inside, I was unraveling. I felt like I was screaming into a void, my voice swallowed up by the walls of this house. No one could hear me, no one could see how much I was hurting. And that loneliness was almost as painful as the shove itself. There were moments of clarity, though. Small sparks of strength that reminded me I wasn't as broken as I felt. Like when I poured the alcohol down the drain. Like when I looked him in the eye and said, "Things will never be the same." Like when I held my son and whispered to myself, "I'll find a way out." Those moments were fleeting, but they mattered. They reminded me that I wasn't powerless, even if it felt that way most days. I don't know when I'll actually take the step of filing for divorce. I don't know when I'll pack up my things and walk away from this house. But I know deep down that it's coming. The marriage is over. There's no fixing it, no going back. And as terrifying as that is, there's also a strange kind of relief in admitting it. I don't have to keep fighting for something that's already dead. I can start fighting for myself, for my son, for the life we deserve. But for now, I'm still here, still trapped in this house that doesn't feel like home. Some days I manage to keep my head above water, focusing on school, on my son, on small joys. Other days, the weight crushes me, and I cry until I can't breathe. It's a roller coaster of emotions, fear, anger, guilt, grief. And through it all, I keep reminding myself, it's not my fault. It's not my fault. Even when my brain tries to convince me otherwise, I whisper it like a mantra, hoping that one day I'll finally believe it. And maybe that's the hardest part, believing that I will be okay. That my son will be okay. That there's life on the other side of this. I want to believe it. I need to believe it. Because right now, that hope is the only thing keeping me from drowning. The weeks that followed blurred together in this strange, exhausting rhythm. On the surface, life went on: school, parenting, chores, bills. But beneath it all was this constant hum of unease. Every morning I woke up with a heaviness in my chest, like I was bracing myself for something to happen. Some mornings H would act perfectly normal, making breakfast, chatting with our son, like the night in the bathroom had never happened. Other mornings he was quiet, withdrawn, sulking around the house like a storm cloud. I never knew which version of him I'd get, and that unpredictability kept me on edge all the time. I became hyper-aware of everything. His tone of voice, the way he moved through the house, whether he opened a beer or not. Even little things, like the way he closed a door or the way his footsteps sounded on the stairs, could send my body into panic. My heart would race, my stomach would not, and I'd have to remind myself to breathe. It was like my nervous system was on high alert, waiting for the next explosion. I hated living like that. I hated feeling like a guest in my own house, tiptoeing around, trying not to upset him. At the same time, I felt this constant tug-of-war inside me. Part of me wanted to pack a bag and run, to get my son out of there and never look back. But then the practical side of me would kick in. Where would we go? How would I afford it? What about the house, the bills, the custody arrangements? I didn't want my son to lose stability. I didn't want to uproot him in the middle of the school year. And so I stayed, telling myself I just needed time to figure it out, time to make a plan. But the longer I stayed, the more I felt myself slipping away. It wasn't just about what happened that night anymore. It was everything. The gaslighting, the drinking, the way he dismissed my feelings, the way he acted like I was the problem. He would text me apologies, write me little notes, try to hold my hand like nothing had happened. And every time I recoiled inside. I didn't want his apologies. I didn't want his hands. I didn't want him. But I played along enough to keep the peace, because the alternative was another fight, another night of tears, another moment of fear. I found myself confiding more in my counselor, leaning into those sessions like a lifeline. For the first time, I said the words without flinching. He put his hands on me. Saying it out loud made it real in a way that thinking it never did. My counselor looked at me with this steady, compassionate gaze and said, "That's not okay. That's abuse. You didn't deserve that." I knew she was right, but hearing the word abuse made me feel like I was sinking. I never thought I'd be that woman. I never thought I'd be in this situation. And yet here I was. At night, when the house was quiet and my son was asleep, I'd lie awake scrolling through my phone, searching for stories like mine. Women on Reddit, in forums, in blogs, sharing their experiences of leaving, of surviving, of rebuilding. Some of the stories gave me hope. Women who found the strength to leave, who created better lives for themselves and their kids. Others terrified me. Women who stayed too long, who endured years of escalating abuse, who lost pieces of themselves they could never get back. I wondered which one I would become. There were moments when H would try to be the man I used to know. He'd cook dinner, make my favorite coffee, crack jokes, play with our son. For a fleeting second, I'd see glimpses of the guy I fell in love with, the guy who made me laugh during long shifts in the military, the guy who once felt like my partner. And those glimpses hurt more than anything, because they made me question myself. Was I overreacting? Was I really going to throw away a decade of marriage because of one shove? But then I'd remember the fear in my chest, the way my back hit the shelves, the way he looked at me when he lost control. And I'd know the answer. It wasn't just one shove. It was the line he crossed, the trust he shattered, the violence that I could never erase from my memory. I noticed how my son started picking up on things, even though I tried so hard to shield him. He'd ask why Daddy was in a bad mood, or why Mommy seemed sad. He started hovering closer to me when H was around, as if he sensed something wasn't right. That broke me in ways I can't explain. I didn't want my son to grow up thinking this was normal, thinking this was what love looked like. I wanted him to see a strong mother, a mother who protected him, a mother who didn't let anyone hurt her. And yet, I felt like I was failing him by staying. Some days, I'd drive my car to the grocery store or to a coffee shop and just sit in the parking lot, staring out the window. I didn't want to go home. I didn't want to walk back into that house where every wall felt tainted, where every room held memories I wanted to erase. But eventually, I always went back because my son was there, and leaving him wasn't an option. Those drives became my tiny escape, the only moments where I could breathe without looking over my shoulder. I also started keeping a mental list of what I'd need to do if I left. Lawyer, finances, custody plan, storage for my stuff. I didn't write it down because I was scared he might find it, but the list lived in my head, growing longer every day. It made me feel like I was taking small steps toward freedom, even if I wasn't ready yet. Meanwhile, graduation loomed closer. That degree became my anchor. I told myself, just make it to graduation. Just hold on until then. With that degree, I could get a better job, a higher income, more independence. Every late-night study session, every paper I turned in, felt like another brick in the path leading me out of this marriage. Still, the emotional toll was brutal. I cried in the shower so my son wouldn't hear me. I wrote long messages to my friend in the middle of the night, pouring out my fears, then deleted them before sending because I didn't want to be a burden. I stared at myself in the mirror and hardly recognized the woman looking back. Tired eyes, forced smiles, shoulders sagging with invisible weight. I used to be so strong, so full of life, and now I felt like a shell of who I was. There were nights when I fantasized about a different life. A small apartment, just me and my son, peace filling the rooms instead of tension. No more walking on eggshells, no more wondering if today would be good or bad, no more pretending. Just freedom. Just safety. The thought of it kept me going, even though it felt so far out of reach. H kept trying to act like things were getting better. He told me he was done drinking, though I caught him sneaking beers more than once. He said he wanted to go to counseling, but never actually made an appointment. He told me he loved me, that he couldn't imagine life without me. And every time he said it, I felt nothing. Or worse, I felt trapped. Because love isn't supposed to feel like this. Love isn't supposed to hurt. I started noticing how my body reacted around him. The way my stomach tightened when he came too close, the way my chest clenched when he raised his voice, the way my hands shook when we argued. It was like my body was screaming the truth that my mind was still too scared to fully accept. I wasn't safe with him. And that's when I knew with absolute certainty that I had to leave. Not tomorrow, not next week, maybe not even next month, but eventually. Because the longer I stayed, the more pieces of myself I lost. And I couldn't let my son lose me too. The decision to leave wasn't one big moment. It was 100 little ones that stacked up until the weight was unbearable. The sound of a beer can opening when he thought I wasn't paying attention. The way my son's face fell when H snapped at me for something small. The way my body flinched when he brushed past me in the hallway, even if he didn't mean anything by it. The way my counselor's voice softened every time she asked, "Do you feel safe at home?" And I had to swallow the lump in my throat because the honest answer was no. I began noticing how much I had stopped living. I wasn't excited about anything anymore. I used to love cooking, experimenting with recipes, filling the house with the smell of garlic and fresh bread. Now I threw together the quickest meals I could just to get it over with. I used to love reading, but now I'd open a book and read the same page 10 times without absorbing a single word. Even school, something I was passionate about, became more about survival than growth. Just finish the assignment. Just pass the class. Just get the degree. My life had shrunk down to survival mode, and it scared me. Every time I imagined leaving, my chest would tighten with fear. I'd see myself packing bags, loading my son into the car, driving away. But then my mind would spiral. Where would I go? How would I pay the bills? What if he fought me for custody? What if the court didn't believe me because I didn't have bruises, because it was just a shove? What if my son hated me for breaking up the family? The what-ifs were endless, and they kept me paralyzed. But then I'd picture the alternative: staying. Staying meant more nights of walking on eggshells, more gaslighting, more apologies followed by broken promises. Staying meant risking that the next shove wouldn't just be into a closet. It could be worse. Staying meant my son growing up in an environment where love looked like tension, where marriage looked like fear. And that terrified me even more. So I started planning quietly. I researched lawyers late at night, scrolling through websites, reading reviews, trying to understand the process. I looked at apartments online, even though I couldn't afford one yet. I checked my bank accounts, my benefits, anything that could give me a sense of financial footing. I started putting aside small amounts of money where he wouldn't notice. It wasn't much, but it was something. A safety net. A lifeline. The secrecy weighed on me, but it also gave me hope. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving towards something, like I wasn't just stuck. Every dollar I saved, every article I read about custody laws, every conversation I had with my counselor, it all added up to strength I didn't know I had. Meanwhile, H seemed oblivious. He kept acting like things were normal, like we were rebuilding. He'd suggest family outings, talk about home improvement projects, even mention vacations. I nodded along, but inside I felt detached, like I was watching a movie of someone else's life. I wasn't his wife anymore. I was just biding my time. There were moments when I almost convinced myself to give him another chance. He'd play with our son, making him laugh so hard he had tears in his eyes, and I'd feel this pang of guilt. My son loved his father. Who was I to take that away from him? But then I'd remind myself, I wasn't taking away his father. H was the one who had put that relationship at risk, not me. I wasn't ending their bond. I was protecting it. Because a father who hurts the mother of his child is not showing love. And I didn't want my son to grow up thinking that was acceptable. Graduation crept closer, and with it, a sense of urgency. I kept telling myself, just make it there. Just cross that stage, degree in hand, and then you'll have the freedom to start over. That milestone became a finish line in my mind. A moment where I could draw a line in the sand and say, this is where my old life ends and my new life begins. Still, the guilt ate at me. I caught myself apologizing constantly, to my son, to friends, even to H, for things that weren't my fault. I apologized when I was tired, when I was stressed, when I wasn't cheerful enough. It was like I had internalized his narrative that I was the problem. That somehow my sadness, my fear, my disappointment was what had broken us. I knew logically that wasn't true, but emotions don't follow logic. Some nights I'd cry myself to sleep whispering, I'm sorry, into the dark, even though I wasn't sure who I was apologizing to anymore. But there were other nights, stronger nights, when I'd lie awake and whisper something else. We're going to be okay. I'd place my hand on my son's back as he slept, feel the steady rise and fall of his breath, and remind myself that he was my reason. He was why I had to keep going, why I had to be brave, why I had to get out. For him. For me. For both of us. The day I finally told H that our marriage was over, I felt strangely calm. There were no screaming matches, no tears, just this cold clarity. I told him that I didn't know exactly when or how, but I would be leaving. That I couldn't forgive him for putting his hands on me, that I couldn't live with the drinking and the gaslighting, that I couldn't raise our son in this environment. He looked at me like I had just stabbed him. His face went pale, his eyes wide, his voice shaking as he said, You can't mean that. But I did. For the first time, I meant it. He tried everything, anger, denial, bargaining. He said I was overreacting. He said it was one mistake. He said he'd change. He said he couldn't live without me. And I listened, but inside I felt nothing. The love was gone. The trust was gone. I wasn't his wife anymore. I was just a woman who had finally reached her breaking point. In the days that followed, he tried to act like we were okay again, as if my words had been a bluff. But I knew better. I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I just kept moving forward with my quiet plan. One step at a time. I still don't know exactly how it will unfold. I don't know what the custody battle will look like, or how messy the divorce will get, or how long it will take before I can truly breathe again. But I know this. I'm not going back. The line has been crossed, and there's no erasing it. Sometimes I grieve for the life I thought I had, for the dreams we built together that now lie in ruins, for the woman I used to be, who believed in love and sacrifice and forever. But then I remind myself that grief is part of healing, that letting go of the past is the only way to build a better future. And I cling to hope. Hope that one day, I'll wake up in a home that feels like peace instead of tension. Hope that my son will grow up knowing what healthy love looks like. Hope that I'll rediscover the parts of myself I've lost. The joy, the laughter, the lightness. I'm not there yet. Some days I still break down. Some days the shame and fear feel unbearable. But other days I feel strong. Other days I can see the path forward, even if it's foggy. Other days I can tell myself with certainty, I will be okay. And maybe that's enough for now. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. Sharing this has been heavy, but it means a lot that you're here with me. If you found yourself connecting with it, or if you believe in supporting people through tough times, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps more than you know, and it lets me keep bringing you real stories like this one.